Hey everyone, welcome to my second of 3 videos on the Canon EOS 20D. In the first video we talked about what everything was. In this video we'll talk about how to do everything with the camera except the menus, and that we'll cover in the third video. For right now, this is a digital camera. We can do nothing whatsoever without a fresh battery. So I'm going to show you how to change the batteries on this camera. First thing you'll notice, I have this frog tape here. This is because the battery chamber, the battery cap or door on this camera is a little bit fidgety. There's a little trigger right here, a little button next to the battery, and when this is pushed down, the camera knows that the battery door is in place. If that's not pushed down, the camera will not turn on, and this battery door doesn't want to close all the way, so I have to use tape to hold it down to trigger that button. So yeah, that's just not sure why they did it that way, but they did. So this is the main camera battery. We're going to remove it by pushing that release off to the side, and now we can remove the battery. This is a BP511. To the best of my knowledge, Canon no longer makes these, but the third-party ones are really good and will work very well in this camera. So just remove the battery, and then when you want to put a new one in, you find it contact side down. There's only one way it can go in, okay? While we have the battery out, I'm going to remove this battery cap right here. Very easy to get to. We're just going to pull it right out. This is a button cell battery cap that takes a CR2016. On button cell batteries, it's always good to get a name brand. Panasonic, Duracell, Energizer, Sanyo are all really good. Don't get a fly-by-night, no name brand one. Those tend to burst, and that's going to really be bad for your camera. But the way that you're going to put this in is negative side goes toward the bottom, positive side goes toward the top, just like this. Just going to slide that right on in. Would help if I tried loading it the correct way. Okay, so I'm going to take the positive terminal and slide it in this way. There we go. That's the motion. And then we just take the button cell and push it back into the battery chamber right here. Grab our BP511, drop it into place, put it in, close the battery chamber door, and now push it down and tape it over because that's the only way to trigger that button in there. Okay. Now we're going to turn the camera on, and having just changed the button cell battery, it's going to ask us to set the date. So use the rear command wheel and we can set the month to July, or we can use the front command wheel to do that. Hit OK. This will take us to the date, which is the 20th. OK. And the year, what year will this go to? So the year will count up to as high as 2050. So hello, way in the future in 2051 when this camera's date function is useless. Okay, we'll go up to here to 2024, and time is whatever time it is. Date format, there we go. However you want it to be presented, and there we go. Now we've set the date, and if the battery is good, we can turn the camera off, and it will not ask for the date when we turn it back on, and it doesn't, and that's how we know we've successfully changed the CR2016 battery and put a fresh one in. So having put new batteries in the camera, we're ready to start doing some things with it. Let's begin by swapping out lenses so that we can see what types of, so we can put a different lens on when we want to. To remove a lens, you push down on the lens release button and you rotate the lens counter or anti-clockwise until it stops, and then you simply remove it. This lens has a red dot for the mounting index. There's a red dot for the mounting index. If this had a white square, I don't have any EFS lenses right now to show you with, but the white square mounting index lines up with the white square, okay? The white square is used for EFS lenses. Those are APS-C and APS-H format lenses. So for this lens, we're going to find the red dot, line them up, set the lens in, and we turn it clockwise until it makes a soft clicking noise, and now we know it's properly mounted and we've changed lenses. Next up, we're going to talk about CF cards. To access the CF card port, you simply slide this door out and pop it open. We're going to grab our CF card. Should be text facing the back like this. Slide it in. And when we slide it in, that little gray lever will pop out. That's how we know that's properly mounted. Now we can close the door, and we've loaded a CF card. A little red light will flash. If we turn the camera on, it should now say that there's a CF card, or it won't say anything. So that's a good sign. Instead of saying no CF card, it just said nothing. Now to remove a CF card, all that we've got to do is open up the door just like we had. Push down on this gray button here. The CF card will eject, and now we can pull it out and go transfer the files to our computer. For CF cards, this camera can take Type 1 and Type 2. This is a Type 2 CF card. A Type 1 CF card was called a micro drive. It was literally a spinning physical hard disk inside a slightly wider card than this. I have not seen a working one of those in like the last 10 to 15 years. They're very slow. They don't hold as much. A standard CF card that you can buy, new or used, will work just fine. The EOS 20D can take CF cards up to 2 terabytes. However, if that card conforms to the Type 1 or Type 2 standard. However, the maximum formattable size, the maximum usable space on a CF card for this camera is 8 gigabytes. So any CF card larger than 8 gigabytes on this camera is a complete waste of money. So that should help out quite a bit. An 8 gigabyte SD card should hold a little bit more than 800 RAW files. So if you know you're going to be out hiking or backpacking for a weekend and you want to bring 2 or 3 of those, you can. They're pretty inexpensive. But just if you're shooting RAW, no, round about 800 RAW files for an 8 gigabyte, around about 100 RAW files per gigabyte, basically. Next up, let's talk a little bit about flash use right here. Now, this is a digital camera, so we're going to just kind of glance over a few things with this, but basically the most important thing to know is that this can take Canon flashes. Canon compatible flashes can also work. With the Canon flashes, you will get things like high-speed sync, automatic exposure metering, TTL metering. You can use the flash for your autofocus confirmation light and a bunch of other little really neat things like that. So using a Canon flash for this is what you're going to want to do. I'm going to give you some pointers on how to make the most out of your flash use so that you can be set up to have really good flash photos. So the first thing is when you buy your flash, read the instructions on it. I'm not an encyclopedia of Canon flash knowledge, so I can't give you the ins and outs of how each of the different ones work. But in general, the most important thing I can teach you about your flash is to use it to create light which we perceive as flattering. What do I mean by that? Well, think about the way that you see the world when you're outside during the day, where the sun is casting light on us from, it's above us. Or at night, if you're outside and there's street lights that are again above us. Or if you're indoors at work or at school and the overhead lights are again above us. We almost always see people lit from above, or anything really lit from above, and that's what we consider to be natural and flattering light. You want to replicate that with your flash as much as possible to set up your subjects to look natural and flattering to the people who view your photos. So I'm not actually going to plug this flash into the camera, even though it would be fine, but it hasn't had batteries in it in 4 years. But with old flashes from the film era, you do not want to connect those to a digital camera because they did not have the back discharge protection that modern flashes designed for digital cameras have. It is theoretically possible that a strong enough flash from the film era could fry your camera. If you only have film era flashes, you want to get an RF adapter so there's no wired connection between your camera and your flash. But here's some pointers on the type of flash you want to look for. The worst possible place to put a flash is pointing at your subject directly above your camera's lens, okay? This is a terrible arrangement because the light leaves the flash in like this flat wall, reaches the subject, bounces back to the lens. Your subjects will have red eye if you don't have red eye protection turned on, but they will definitely look flat and waxy. So to replicate overhead lighting with a flash like this, you just simply tilt the head upward. Now you can bounce the light off of the ceiling. If you don't have a ceiling, you're going to be shooting outside or something, then some flashes also have swiveling heads. This one does not, but you could swivel the head and tilt the head, and now you could bounce the light off of, say, a reflector or a wall, something like that. And then you could still replicate that overhead lighting and have a nice, natural, flattering look to your subject. So when you go to buy a flash for your EOS 20D, that's what you want to look for. A Canon flash with a tilting and a swiveling head, and that will set you up to use this to the best of its ability. And then that Canon flash will also be able to be used properly in the different modes with your camera. All right, next thing we're going to talk about with the Canon EOS 20D is the mode dial. And the mode dial is where you're going to determine a lot about the parameters on how your camera works and takes photos. There we go. Okay, So what we're going to do is we're going to start here with the green box, and then we're going to go up through these modes, and then we're going to go through the scene modes here, okay? We'll talk about what each of them do. As a general rule, if you're here because you got this camera to become a better photographer and learn more about how to take photos, these scene modes aren't going to do a lot for you, if anything. So avoid these as much as possible. Green box is a good way to learn the camera because it will let you learn the layout while the camera still delivers good photos for you. And then you can branch into these semi-automatic, and full manual modes to get more creative control over your photos. The way that Magic Green Box works is the only thing you do is that you tell the camera when to take the photo. It's going to determine the aperture, the shutter speed. I think it will also determine the ISO. I can't recall for sure on this camera off the top of my head. But basically, this turns your camera into a big cell phone. You point the camera at the scene, you tell it when to take the photo, and it does. So, like I said, if you've just gotten this camera and you've never used a DSLR before, learn the layout in green box mode. You'll get some photos out of it, but you'll learn where all the buttons are and start familiarizing yourself with the camera. We're going to go here into program mode, okay? In program mode, you choose the ISO, you determine if the flash is going to fire, and you also have the ability to do something called program shifting. What that means is that in program mode, the camera will pick the best shutter speed and aperture for you based on the light in front of the lens. But if you hold down the shutter button and adjust the front or rear command wheel, you can, maybe just the front command wheel, at least with the way this camera is configured, you can force the camera into different settings. So the camera will default to some settings, but you can tell it, no, actually I don't like those settings, let's go with these ones instead, and it will still deliver a proper exposure. You can also, in program mode, do something called exposure value compensation shifting. With program mode, if you adjust the front wheel, you'll get different settings that give you a proper exposure. If you use the rear wheel, at least with the way this camera is configured, now you're getting exposure value compensation. Only one of these numbers is changing. And if you notice here on the light meter display, you're giving the camera too much, or the image too much light, you're giving it now too little light. With exposure value compensation, you can intentionally have a dark image, you can intentionally have a bright image to compensate for meter misreadings or for creative benefit, or to take multiple photos to bracket your photos, or to take an HDR image, for instance. A proper exposure is the center of that light meter there. The block is below it, and that's how you know you've got a proper exposure with this camera. Shutter TV mode is called time value, also typically called shutter priority. What this mode does is you pick the shutter speed, and the camera will pick the aperture. If the aperture is flashing, then the camera cannot give you a proper exposure with the lens that you have on the camera. So you need to adjust the shutter speed until that's not flashing. You pick the shutter speed, the camera picks the aperture. And you can also use the rear command wheel to intentionally overexpose or underexpose your images in shutter priority mode. Aperture priority mode on the Canon EOS 20D is where you select the aperture right here, and the camera will pick the shutter speed that's required to give you the optimal exposure. So you're not likely to see the shutter speed blink here. The shutter speed range on this camera is way, way, way bigger than the aperture range is on any lens. So, but if that does blink, you know that you're not going to get a proper exposure. So you select the aperture, camera selects the shutter speed. On the back again, you can intentionally underexpose or intentionally overexpose your images to play around with exposure value and things like that, and to get darker low-key images, brighter high-key photos, things like that. In manual mode, you control the shutter speed and the aperture yourself. Rotate the front command wheel, and with the way this camera is currently set up, that adjusts the shutter speed. If I rotate the rear command wheel, it adjusts the aperture with the way this camera is set up. Now in video, I keep saying in the way this camera is set up. In video 3, I'll show you how to change that around. So in manual mode, your objective is to look at the light meter either here on the LCD screen or in the viewfinder. You see the same thing, and get that dot under the line to be centered on the line. That's a proper exposure like that, okay? This is too little light, you're gonna have a dark photo. This is too much light, you're gonna have a very bright photo, okay? So it doesn't matter whether you adjust your shutter speed or your aperture or both, your goal is to get a proper exposure in full manual mode. And if the photo turns out well and has a proper exposure, it's because you did your job right, and it's your fault that the photo turned out. And if the photo does not turn out in manual mode, then you didn't do your job right, and it's your fault that the photo didn't turn out. The camera will do what you want it to do, whether that's right or not. A-Dep is automatic depth of field. And what's going to happen is that the camera will use the autofocus to look at the scene in front of it and figure out what aperture is needed to give you a depth of field for multiple subjects that are lined up across your photo so that they're all in focus. So if you imagine taking a picture of a few friends, right, and they're all lined up and each friend takes a step back so that they're actually kind of like in a diagonal line like this across the frame, then the friend in front could be in focus and the friend in back could be blurry if the aperture isn't set correctly. A-Dep, as I understand it, is used to combat that. Honestly, it's a mode I've only ever seen on Canon. I think they're the only ones who do it. I've never used A-Dep. I've never been in a setting where it's been something I've been needed that I've needed. So I have taken photo 0 in A-Dep mode. It's not one that I would be inclined to use the way I would do what this does. I'd focus on the person in the center. I'd adjust the aperture. I'd use the depth of field preview button to see what's going to be in focus. And if I need more, I'd do more. And if I need less, I'd do less. And then just take the photo. So multiple ways to skin the cat, basically. We're going to come down here to the scene modes, and this first one is called portrait mode. And guys, you're never going to guess what this is for. It's for portraits. All right, portrait mode. The way that you can use this to the best effect is to set your kit zoom lens to the longest end of the focal length, or if you're using something like a 55 to 200, set it in the 135-ish range. And then you're going to want to have yourself be far enough back from your subject so that if you're taking a portrait orientation photo, like their shoulders are down here and their head is over here, okay? And then you want to have your subject be 8 or 10 feet in front of the background so that the background is suitably blurry. This mode is going to attempt to give you a depth of field which will have your subject be in focus, but the background be out of focus. Next up is landscape, another cleverly named thing designed to prevent you from figuring out that it's actually for landscapes. And landscape mode is for landscapes. You want to use the wide end of your kit zoom lens or a wide angle prime lens to get the most out of this mode. What it's going to do is give you a small aperture for a maximum depth of field. So something that's very close to your lens will be in focus, and some distant mountains or clouds way off far away will also be in focus. With landscape mode, you can set your camera up to be successful by having something along the bottom, like rocks or flowers or something that is in focus, something in the middle, which is a little bit further back from your subject, and that would be something like a lake or maybe a forest. That would also be in focus. And then way in the top third of your image, you'd have sky or mountains or something like that that would be in the distance. And that would create this like receding distance in your photo that the camera will capture in focus, and that will give depth to your image so that it looks more like a successful traditional landscape photo. Here we have close-up mode. Close-up mode is going to predispose the camera to focus at the closest focus points of the lens. Also, this is a mode that tends to work well on, say, this kit 28 through 80 in the 50 through 80 millimeter range, something like that. So basically, this just tells the camera, hey, what I'm going to be taking a photo of is going to be close to the lens. Next up is sports mode. Sports mode works really well with telephotos or the long range of your kit zoom lens, or the 55 to 200 type lens would be really good for this. And what this is going to do is give you the fastest shutter speed the camera can to freeze motion. Probably a shallow depth of field because you need a large aperture to freeze motion, but the goal of the camera here is to give you a fast shutter speed. Night portrait mode is something that has a very singular use. It's for taking portraits at night with something in the background. With this mode, you want to have your camera on a tripod, and you also want to have whomever you're taking a photo of know that they're going to have a long exposure. The way that this works is this takes a long photo with a flash. The flash is used to illuminate a person who's sitting in the foreground. The long exposure is used to illuminate something like a city skyline that's behind them. So you want to tell your person who you're going to take a photo of, wait until I tell you to move after this photo, because if the flash goes at the beginning of the photo and then they get up and walk away, all those lights that were behind them will shine through them. It'll look kind of weird. So however long that photo is, you're going to want to make sure that your subject's sitting there for the whole photo, even after the flash goes off. And lastly, this mode is called no flash. It disables the flash. Perfect for things like museums and plays where you don't want a flash going off. All right, next thing we're going to do is talk about what these buttons up here do, okay? And so we saw the LCD illumination, but I'll show you that again because it might be a little bit clearer. There we go. Okay. These are your autofocus and white balance modes. For autofocus to work, your lens autofocus switch must be switched to AF. Okay, so I'm going to hold down this button, and as I do, when I rotate the front command wheel with the way this camera is currently configured, if yours is different, video 3 will show you how to swap that if you want. But rotating the front command wheel, I can switch between 3 different autofocus modes. One shot, AI servo, nope, AI automatic, and AI servo. That's the order. Okay, what one shot does is with one shot, you hold down the shutter button halfway to activate your autofocus, or the asterisk if you have it set up that way. You activate autofocus with one of the buttons. When the camera locks focus, it holds focus until you take the photo. This is ideal if you are, say, taking a still life, or a portrait, or a landscape, because those subjects don't move. Once you have focus locked, they're not going to go anywhere, so you can use it for that type of use. Our next option is called AI Servo. We're going to do this one next. It's on the bottom. AI Servo is the exact opposite. It's really good for moving subjects, pets, sports, kids, whatever. With AI Servo, once the camera locks onto a subject and gains focus, it will start tracking motion moving subjects, or it will change focus as needed before the photo is taken to account for things that are moving in front of it. So this, if you set it to one shot, you're going to tell the camera, I have a stationary subject. If you set it to AI Servo, you're telling the camera, I have moving subject. The last option is AI Focus, and this is automatic mode, as we would call it today. Basically, you tell the camera, it may be the subject stationary, but maybe it's moving. You decide based on what you see coming through the lens, and it will. And this will tell the camera to switch between servo and one-shot modes as needed for your photos. Your white balance modes, here I'm going to hold this button down and rotate through the options with the rear command wheel. Auto white balance is just a general good white balance mode that's used to tell the camera, I might just shoot in different lighting today, so just look at it and decide what's best for white balance. That next one is a K for Kelvin. Kelvin we can manually set in Video 3, and you can set a specific Kelvin temperature for your white balance if you want to have images that are slightly warmer or slightly cooler. Next up is custom white balance. So that's our custom white balance symbol, and in Video 3 I'll show you where to go to the menus to do this, but in this mode what you do is you set a custom white balance by taking a photo. So what this is good for is, let's say you're doing a tabletop studio of selling things that you want to sell online. You have a bunch of different colorful things, and if you have a white backdrop and you put in something that's red or pink or blue or green, that color is going to be absorbed by the white backdrop, and that's going to throw off your white balance for your different photos. So in your tabletop studio, what you would do is set up your lighting, and then you would take a photo of the white backdrop with nothing in your tabletop studio, with your lighting in place, and then that will record the white balance settings needed to make that white backdrop white. And then that way, when you take your photos of your red, green, blue, orange, purple, whatever different things, the colors from them don't splash onto the white backdrop and affect your color balance settings, your white balance settings rather. And that will mean that when you get all your raw photos back, they'll be just that much easier to edit in bulk, because the colors will be consistent across all of your images. This also applies if you're doing a portrait shoot. If you're going to a corporate site to take photos of a 20 or a 50 person office, you set up an auto custom white balance for that specific shoot with a white card or a white backdrop in the setting before anyone shows up, and you use that across the entire shoot. Now, everyone's skin tone, everyone's clothes, the colors on those will be properly balanced across the entire photo shoot, and people won't end up looking different shades of whatever color they are than they actually do look. Our next one here is flash, and this is a flash compensation. So flash light from xenon bulbs, like your standard xenon flash like this right here, is very blue. Xenon bulbs have a cool tone light. So in flash white balance, the camera will turn your images it'll add a bunch of yellow or amber to it to counteract the blueness of your flash. This next one here is fluorescent. And fluorescent lights are very green. So the camera will add a bunch of magenta to counter the greenness of the fluorescent lights in whatever setting you're shooting in. So if you are taking photos inside of your school and underneath the overhead lights, which are fluorescent, and you're like, oh man, I'm in auto white balance, but all my people look like they're about to puke because they're kind of green toned. Then just go over here to fluorescent white balance and it should rectify that. The next option here is called tungsten. Tungsten lights aren't used so much anymore because the filaments for them, they're just, everything's gone to LED, right? But when tungsten lights were made, they were very orange or amber, warm toned. And so this would add a bunch of blue to counter the warmth of the tungsten lighting in your digital files. That's what that does. Next up we have shade, full clouds rather, and shade, and we'll talk about these two in conjunction. Basically, full clouds assumes you're going to be under clouds on a sunny day. Well, obviously if it's cloudy, it's not sunny, but that the sunlight will be coming through the clouds. Shade assumes you're going to be in shade in an otherwise sunny day, like in the shade of a barn, tree, building, a wall, something like that. And so your subject will be standing in that shaded area, but that the light around them will be full spectrum. So both of those are used for outdoor lighting conditions, and the colors that are balanced in the white balance as it's balanced in the camera is specific to those two different settings. And the last one we're going to look at is full sun. This is where you're telling the camera, I'm shooting under full sun, full spectrum light. Just assume that consistently throughout, it's going to be full spectrum. This is, an important one if you're shooting outside, if you want to set it to this, because sometimes auto white balance can be tripped up a little bit by the colors that are in your photos. If you're taking landscapes and it sees a big blue lake, it might assume that you have tons of blue in your photo and add a little bit of amber, which could turn your skies this like gunmetal color. So that's one of the reasons to use use daylight if you're shooting outside. I'm going to go back to auto white balance, and now we're going to look at drive and ISO. So if I push down the drive ISO button, and the first thing that I do is rotate the top command wheel, with the way this camera is set up, I now am adjusting the drive. So this is single shot. With this, if I push down the shutter button and take a photo, it will take a photo, and then I can hold the shutter button for the rest of my life and it will never take a photo. And not a second one anyway. This next mode is called continuous. That's the 3 frame per second burst rate that will last a handful of, 3 seconds until the raw buffer runs out, and that will keep taking photos as long as I hold down the shutter button until the camera runs out of memory. Next up is self timer, and the self timer is a countdown. So I push the shutter button and the camera will count down and then take a photo after the self timer is done, and then we're back to single shot. Those are the 3 modes. If I push down the drive ISO button here, and now I rotate the rear command wheel, I can select the ISO from as slow as 100 to as fast as high, which is 3200. And that's how you select your ISO on this camera. Over here we have your metering modes and flash exposure compensation. This is not image exposure compensation. This is only flash exposure compensation. So if you have the pop-up flash popped up, or you're using, I think most, if not all, Canon flashes will work with this. We're going to start with flash exposure compensation. We rotate the rear command wheel, and you can tell the camera put out more light. Overclock the flash, make it brighter than normal. Or, oh man, I'm getting some weird glares from my flashes. Underclock it, make it dimmer so that I don't get the glare off someone's glasses or in a piece of chrome on this car I'm taking a photo of or whatever. So with flash exposure compensation, you can manually adjust up to 2 stops in either direction in 3rd stop increments, how much less light the flash puts out, or how much more, to compensate for specific needs when you're taking flash photos. This last one we're going to talk about here is your metering mode. Rotate the front command wheel, and we have evaluative, center weighted, and partial or spot. I believe that's how those are. Do I have it written down? I believe that I have that correctly. Okay. So with evaluative, which is everything's lit up, what that's going to do is it's going to look at everything in the scene. The bright area here of this glare from the light on the screen, the really dark areas of the camera, the mid-tone areas of the gray of the LCD, and it's going to use algorithms to take all of that information and figure out what the best aperture and shutter speed should be for what the camera's looking at. If you're just out walking around, hanging out with friends, or just shooting most of the time, evaluative's going to be just fine. Evaluative on Canon cameras, really good. So it's a good metering mode for most situations. Next up, two parentheses that should be center weighted. I wrote the script 2 years ago and I did not write down what the symbols meant, but generally speaking, two parentheses is center weighted. Okay. If it's not, then the description I'm giving you, at least, of what center weighted is correct. In center weighted, the camera will look at the center of the image, and the majority of the metering information will come from that area. Depends on the exact camera and maker, but it could be anywhere from 60-40. The center is 60%, the balance of the frame is 40%, to 75-25. And that will allow the what's in the center of the image to provide the majority of the metering information. So you can use that if you're going to center compose your photos. And then what's in the center of the image will be what the meter is looking at primarily to give you a proper meter reading. This last one that we're going to talk about is called 9% partial. And this is spot metering mode in typical terminology. This looks at a very small area in the center of the frame, and I believe, yeah, if you look through your viewfinder, there's a circle in your viewfinder. That's your 9% area. And 100% of the meter reading comes from that area. So let's talk really quickly about why that even matters. When I make these videos, I have a gray card that I put at the video at the front of it so that I can take a meter reading and lock in the meter settings for the whole video, and that gives the entire video a nice, even, and accurate exposure. The meter in your camera is going to try to turn everything this gray. So if you have a spot meter and you have the gray card, for instance, I'll give you an example of how to use that in a minute, you'll get a meter reading that for your lighting will give you a proper exposure. So if I now put the white card in front of the meter reading, in front of the camera rather, you might notice that things have gotten much darker, okay? With gray, there we go. And with white, things get a lot darker because the camera's trying to make the white a gray shade. The same is true if I go to a black card. I hope you're not looking at this in a dark room. It's going to make everything very bright, okay? So what the camera's trying to do with whatever is in the center of the image, the metering area, it's trying to give you a, here we go, a nice grayscale tone to that what's in that middle of that metering area, so that the dark areas look dark and the bright areas look bright. So how is this useful? Well, let's say you're doing a tabletop or a studio portrait session. Same concept for both of these. You'll shoot in full manual mode. You'll use partial metering to take a meter reading off a gray card that is either in the center of your studio setup or that somebody's holding in the studio setup. You dial in your manual settings, and then you take a couple test shots to be sure, but then because you're using manual mode that all of your photos have the exact same shutter speed and aperture. Because you metered off of that gray card, things that are supposed to be dark will be dark. Things that are supposed to be light will be light. So if you imagine that you're doing a studio shoot with a white backdrop and you meter off of that gray card, then somebody who sits down who's wearing a dark shirt or who has dark skin tone, those dark tones will be appropriately dark in your image because you've already dialed in manual shutter speed and aperture settings for that gray card meter reading. Same thing with somebody who's very pale and shows up wearing a white shirt. Then their tone and their shirt tone will be accurate to what they were wearing. Spot metering gives you the ability to say, this right here, this exact point, is what I want to have be the midpoint of my image. So if I know that this is gray, then what's around it is going to be dark, and what's in a highlight will be bright. And it gives you a ton of control over how your meter is used to determine exposure settings. Okay, so having covered everything on the top of the camera, now let's start talking about what's on the back here. Menu button, video 3. We're going to cover everything in here in video 3. Info button brings up information about your settings. If you press this, you can refer to the information in here and make sure that the settings that you have set up are correct for what you want to use. If you have a CF card with images, you can hit playback, you can delete individual images, you can jump through images with these settings. In playback mode, you can also zoom out of your image or into a multiple image view, or you can zoom in to a single image from that multi-image view or into fine details on your images to make sure you've gotten focus correct, for instance. Power switch. Camera is off, camera is on, and the rear command wheel is also on. Set button works like an OK button. We'll also, I believe in video 3, there should be an option to change what this does in use. Might not be set up for anything in this camera's configuration. And then we have the Crosspad button up here, which can be used for navigation. These two buttons are the Asterisk button and the Autofocus selection button. These have different uses based on how you want to configure them in video 3. In general, the Asterisk button is often used as either auto exposure lock, or in this camera's configuration, it's triggering the autofocus itself. So there we go. It's actually making the camera autofocus. And that's one of the settings for it. You can use the Asterisk button as an autofocus start and stop button so that you don't accidentally take a picture, because the other way to start and stop autofocus is by pressing the shutter button. The autofocus point button over here, I'm going to hold it down, and on the LCD screen you might be able to see now rotating the command wheels. I can select a specific autofocus point or have the camera automatically select the autofocus point for me. So I can tell the camera a specific autofocus point I want to use, or a manually selected one. The benefit of manually selecting an autofocus point is, let's say you want to take a series of photos that are composed with the same basic same place of the image in focus. Portrait orientation, portrait photos. If you're going to shoot photos of 10 or 20 or 40 people, and you want the bridge of their noses to all be in the same spot in the frame and have that autofocus point be the focus point used, you can do that. If you're going to be shooting sports and you want to have a whole bunch of shots where the action is happening over here, heading toward this direction, you can set one of these autofocus points over here, and the camera will only use it, so it will look for action in that autofocus point area only, and it will give you a more reliable result when you go to take those action photos. So basically, when you specify an autofocus point, the camera will only use that. So you just need to make sure that you create your composition so that that autofocus point that's in use is the one the camera is where the action is going on in the photo. Next up, let's talk about what's in the camera's viewfinder. And this is quite literally just a printout of page 13 from the manual for the camera, but we're just going to go through what everything is and talk about the information it gives you a little bit. So here's the overall focusing screen when you look through the viewfinder, okay? These points along here are your autofocus points. So they will light up red if you have the setting for that in video, and we'll see that in video 3 active, and that will tell you which autofocus point is being used. This circle, as I mentioned, is the partial metering circle. So if you have your camera set to partial metering, right in there is the partial metering area. Focusing matte around here, this is where you can compose your image and you can see what's going to be on your sensor after you take your photo. Down here, we have a bunch of different information on the underside, okay? The asterisk here indicates that auto exposure or focus lock is active. If you see this asterisk in your viewfinder, either your exposure or your focus is locked, or if you're bracketing images, then bracketing is in progress. This flash symbol here indicates the flash on your camera is ready to fire, either the pop-up or a Canon flash connected to the hot shoe. This H indicates that you're ready to use high-speed sync flash with your high-speed sync compatible flash unit. This symbol indicates that flash exposure compensation is on. This is only for flash exposure compensation. So if you see this, your flash is either going to put out too much or too little light for the exposure that's needed. Shutter speed readout, aperture readout. This is your light meter display, okay? As we talked about in manual mode, your objective is to get that dot under the center lit up, and in manual mode you can adjust your shutter speed and aperture to move the dots under the light meter display to give yourself more light or too little. In your program aperture priority or shutter priority modes, the center dot should be lit up unless you are intentionally exposure shifting or your lighting, lens, and sensitivity settings don't give you a proper exposure. Over here, this is your white balance correction. So if in video 3, we'll talk about white balance setups and how to do white balance corrections. If those are on, this will be lit up. Next one over here is your max burst images remaining. How many images are left in the buffer before you run out of buffer on your camera? And here, this last one is your focus indication light. If this light is lit up, something's going to be in focus. Is it what you want to have be in focus? Only you know that. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but something will be in focus. And with that, let's talk about how to take a photo, because we've basically covered everything else on this camera. Okay? So the goal of this camera is to have you do all of your setup ahead of time. You decide which mode you're going to take a photo in. You're going to have your menu set up, as we're going to talk about in video 3. You're going to select your autofocus mode and white balance, your drive mode and ISO, your metering mode and flash compensation if you're using it. And then if you're in one of the semi-automatic modes, which is AV or TV, you select your parameter that you can. If you're in manual mode, you select your shutter speed and aperture. In the other modes, programmed through no flash, the camera does that for you. Then all you have to do is line up the camera and hold down the shutter button and let it take a photo. The way that this camera is designed is that you do all the setup ahead of time, and then at the moment you want to take the photo, all you have to worry about is composing the image in the viewfinder and taking a photo with the shutter button. And that's everything for video 2. If you want to go check out video 3 and learn how to set up your menus, here's a card that will take you right there so you can set up your menus right now.